You don't hate the white man. You don't even fear them. Because if black people hate and fear the white man the way they hate and fear each other, you would all have left this country at the end of slavery.
Left this country and go where?
Go where?
Yeah.
Where did the Jews go to?
This man says, well, you're supposed, so if you hated the white man as much as you would have got up and left to go back to where? Like, he just asked, where would we go back to? What's going on, YouTube? It's your boy Lee here, back again. And listen, shout out to the Daily Wrap-Up crew. We got Africans versus Black Americans. A long overdue conversation. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, I already watched a little bit of it, and I'll be honest, this is triggering. There's gonna be a lot of stuff that might piss you off. So if you try to have a good day, I'll be 100% keep it pushing. But honestly, it's worth listening to. So let's hop on in.
The first topic I want to get into is, how do you define culture? And under your definition, do Black Americans have a unique culture? Let me start here with Frank.
Well, I'm glad you used the word unique culture. So yes, I'm sure you all saw the episode, that got everybody on my case, except this gentleman who was the only one brave enough to say, well, look, before I cut him into pieces, let me give him a chance to come into the studio and explain, to the audience.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. People say, oh, you're from Benin. And I'll say, yes. And they say, what's Benin culture like? And then I freeze. Because there's nothing like a Benin culture. Or if you're from Ghana, or if you're from Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Liberia, there is no such thing. But if you say, oh, you are Yoruba, I said, yes. What is Yoruba culture like? Then he or she is able to start to talk. When I say there is no such thing as African American culture, they're like, what do you mean? Well, culture for me is not dance, food, clothing. Those are not cultures. Culture is a worldview. The worldview is what drives people.
So the first thing that he breaks into is he does not think culture is food, drink, dance, like some of these things that actually are culture. So it's very interesting. The first thing he says is, okay, well, if you ask me what this specific type of place culture is, I couldn't explain it. But if you ask me what a continental culture might be, then I can begin to break into it. But to say that culture is a worldview is not accurate. That's not what culture is. The absolute meaning of culture is the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. It's also customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or social group. That's very succinct and very, very specific, meaning that anything that a group of people have done, including things like music, arts, clothing, right? Ways of speaking, all of those things are part of culture. So to say it's a worldview is absolutely not true. A worldview is painted by the things that you experience. Culture is something that is completely different. It's something you grew up knowing. People have a specific type of culture, and let's say in Louisiana, in comparison to Florida, in comparison to Ohio, in comparison to California, because culture is very different. How people expect things, how people talk to you. There's this thing called, Southern hospitality. See what I'm saying?
Their relationship to wealth, to money, to community, to marriage, to family. It's the worldview they have. That's the foundation of a culture. And number two, there is no possibility for you to have a culture without having a language. So if you read most of the books written by brilliant African Americans, the first thing you see, the headline is, the traumatic thing about slavery is not merely changing your environment. The traumatic thing about slavery is not merely asking you to work long hours.
This might be a long one, y'all. This might be a long one. Okay, first, man, this man says this. He says, in order to have a culture, you have to have a language. What do you mean? You have to have a language. You mean like a different language compared to everyone else? Do you know that the majority of the world chooses to speak English? So even if your place of residence doesn't have a specific language, doesn't mean it doesn't have a culture because it doesn't have a language, quote unquote, associated with it. Just because you may speak Italian in the United States doesn't mean you have Italian culture. How does that make sense? Anyway, He also goes into slavery. He says, well, the things that weren't necessarily the traumatic parts were working long hours. I work long hours now and it's traumatic. What you mean, bro? Come on. This feels very disingenuous of the Black American experience. And ultimately, I feel like we're not really addressing anything. He's kind of dodging around the question a little bit by saying, well, here's my definition of what I think culture is instead of what it actually is. So that way Black people do not seem like they have culture.
The traumatic thing about slavery is one thing only, which everyone has written about. They took our language away. They took our culture away. They took our history and religion away. That is a traumatic thing about being a slave. Now, if they took those things away, how and when were they recovered?
He says the traumatic thing was everything that was taken away, not the other things. Being tortured, having our kids being used as bait, having our body parts removed, being castrated, being buck broken. Some of these things aren't as traumatic as having our history rewritten or taken away. I would argue that everything a part of the package of slavery that Black Americans experienced was traumatic, extremely traumatic. This still affects people this day. There are people who are still alive from the civil rights movement. You saying to me that, well, that wasn't that traumatic. It was the fact that they don't remember that they were from Africa. Really?
So I met a gentleman. I was attending a conference in Singapore, and I met this gentleman who was a Korean sociologist. So we started talking during coffee, and I said, oh, I lived in Korea for 2 years when I was reporting. And he said, oh, wow. And then we started talking. I don't remember how the conversation came about when he asked me. He said, so your country was colonized? I said, yes, and his country, Korea, was colonized by the Japanese for 49 years. And he said, what did you guys, meaning referring to people in Benin, what did you lose as a result of colonization? And I froze and I said, whoa, nobody has ever asked me that question. So I said, Prof, you tell me, and that will give me some idea. And he said, no, we're Koreans, we're colonized by the Japanese. So when they left, all we lost was time. We just went back being Koreans. And from that day, I could tell clearly, what did we lose as a result of colonization in Africa? What did you lose as a result of slavery?
I cannot believe that he just, I can't believe that he just used this as a comparison. Colonization compared to slavery, especially the unique experience of Black Americans in America, is vastly different. We weren't considered people. We were livestock. We were used. There were reports that African American children or slave children were feed in troughs like pigs. The comparison is unreal here.
If you don't fix that which you lost, you're not going to make any way forward. So in Africa, the countries that exist today were never there. They force a group of tribes that have their own distinct cultures to become a country. So they've lost their distinct cultures, trying to have a culture as a collective, which is never going to happen. So for me, first and foremost, when I talk about culture, I'm talking about a worldview, meaning the collective have to have one reason they are here on earth, and that thing is what drives them. So they are dance and food, and no, those are not. I came from a place where, as a young boy, I was given a worldview, and it guided me everywhere I went. So when you meet me outside my culture, you can tell from my behavior, he must come from a culture that believes in XYZ. So a culture becomes more pronounced when you are outside the group. As an individual, outside your group, people must be able to tell.
Okay. Dave, what is your rebuttal to that?
It's not so much a rebuttal, it's a difference in philosophy. And there's a couple of things that I gotta push back on simply because they were not available to us. See, when Frank was born, he inherited a culture. We had to make one with what we had. Some of us, if I were to swab any one of you, you would find some Nigerian, you would find some Ghanaian. Like, we had to hodgepodge, not to mention, out of all of the places that Black people were forced into when we were slaves, 3% came to what we now consider the United States of America. And then we were bred over time. We were buck broken over time. They would take our women and grape them out of respect for your channel. You know what I'm saying? Drop the G. And
Man, he is cooking right now. And I think this is very, very important. As I mentioned just even a second ago, that the fact of the matter is, we had so many experiences. And I would say we, as in my historical background, as far as Black Americans go, as far as my great-grandfather and so on and so forth, experienced something that was completely unique and different in comparison to those who still or came from Africa. Everything that we had was taken away from us, so we had to create something from nothing. He said he came from a culture that he inherited. We had to take what we were experiencing here and create something from it. And let's be honest, as I've said in a previous video, Black Americans are some of the most influential in the world. Everywhere you can see some type of implementation of Black culture. And Black culture not just includes what you would consider music, but most of music has Black relativity in it. Country music, jazz, you name it, started with the majority of Black Americans. So you not only have music, you have clothing, inspirations for certain things. You have technology, thanks to Black Americans. So he's pointing out this aspect that I think Frank here is not wanting to acknowledge, or he may acknowledge it in the future. I don't know yet, but he may acknowledge it. But there's a reality that there is something different about what we experienced here in comparison to anywhere else.
And then on top of that, they had a split breast system. And the split breast system means that one breast would feed the white children of the slave master and the other one would feed the Black children that were going to be bought off and sold. We also have a situation where we had to face things that no other Black person on the continent had to face. You know, taking our children and feeding them to alligators, lynching, Jim Crow, all of those things. And when you look at it, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, the pulse of America runs through foundational Black Americans. Who was the first person to die in the Revolutionary War? Crispus Attucks, Black man, foundational Black American, right? Harriet Tubman made the Underground Railroad and stopped it in Philadelphia. There are all of these things that have happened that make it who we are. Now, as a person who was the first Black youth president of an organization called the National Conference of Christians and Jews, to Frank's point, I do agree, you don't really see your culture until you're out of it. So I'm a raisin and buttermilk in a conversation where there's a bunch of white Christians and a bunch of Jewish people, and they're like, hey, we do this. I'm like, no, Black people don't do that. You know what I'm saying? From the way we walk, the way we talk, the way we eat, the way we move. Not to mention, you can't go anywhere on this earth without seeing our influence. The problem is, unlike any other Black culture on the face of the planet, we have been colonized and monetized.
Ooh. I like how he brings up the point that a lot of Black Americans, when they're outside of their culture, some of the things that we're used to is so very different than a lot of other cultures. And it is true. There's a lot of aspects, especially when you come to Christendom, that Black Christendom does not do. There are a lot of aspects that just the average white person and average Black person just don't do similarly, which is very factual. And even more so, the fact that he said that Black culture has become monetizable from other sources. The truth is, and I know this is an insane thing to think about, but almost everything that Black Americans create, somebody else can monetize off of. We don't really get the opportunity to fully monetize all the things that we create, but through other sources, we get that monetization. So we get paid from some of our ideas, but we often don't get the credit for those ideas, if that makes sense.
For profit by everyone, including the Koreans. K-pop ain't nothing but R&B. Let's call it what it is. And it's R&B under duress, because if you look at what happened with Megan Thee Stallion when she was dealing with those K-pop girls, she was like, oh, it's serious up in here. Because if they miss a step, they get what Joe Jackson gave Mike and them, but worse. There are all of these things that take place. that no one wants to talk about. So no, we don't have a language because we weren't allowed to speak our language under penalty of death. When you talk about you can't come to the cookout and things of that nature, people forget picnic is an abbreviated slang term, which means you get to picking to lynch.
Man, I want to see his response from this. I don't know what he's going to say, because this is so factual. People do want to distinct the difference between what Black Americans through not just the Civil War, but all the way back into slavery, of what happened. And they want to separate those things to say, well, what is Black America now? And even Frank said earlier, in order to fix things, you have to fix things from the past to move forward, correct? So we still in America haven't fixed a lot of things that have affected Black Americans. I mean, when you look at redlining, when you look at the ability to even create and sustain wealth, a lot of that stuff was negated. A lot of that stuff was taken away from us. So you have this perspective that you have to constantly address that has happened. And in order to understand what culture is to Black people, you have to understand what happened, because a lot of it has been responses. And the fact of the matter is, like he said, under the penalty of death, they were not allowed to speak their language. They were given a different name. Look at Roots. Your name is Toby. No, I'm Kunta Kinte. And they beat that out of them. This is a truth that you can't deny.
Postcards came from pictures that they used to take the back of and mail for people who couldn't see the lynching that they had. All of these things we survived. And the funny thing is, everyone's coming over here and benefiting from the fact that we put out the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. All of those things that started as the Black Liberation Movement, but then got shoehorned into civil rights because everybody wants to come off of our pain. It's still a part of who we are. American culture is Black culture. The problem is, not only did we have to create it, but everybody else got to monetize it. We don't own major forms of media. So the message that goes out to the world about foundational Black Americans is very lopsided. It's very negative. Even Frank said to Nancy, he said, well, what is your culture? Twerking?
Man, Dave Anderson, you are a monster. Man, I got to give that man his claps, because he is absolutely true. We don't have anything of our own. I don't want to say we don't have anything of our own, but anything that's very multimedia is not something we own. And so the image of Black people across the world often is not what we want to portray. It is from those big companies, those big media outlets. I mean, you got to look at music. I mean, there are so many artists that come out and say, well, I'm not allowed to talk about these things, but I am allowed to talk about these things. And if I talk about God, if I talk about this, it's not allowed, but I have to talk about these things. And so the perception of Black people around the not just the US, but around the world is not the thing that we want to show people. It's what is often put forth. Now, also we'll get the perspective of, well, why do you put it out there? Well, why do you do it? Because a lot of people don't know how to make money otherwise, right? So there's a lot of people who choose to do these things because it's the only way they can make some type of money, or to get themselves out of situations that they might end up dying in. And I'm not saying it's okay. It's not good, and it doesn't give us the best picture of what Black Americans are. But truthfully speaking, that's not the majority of people.
Negating the fact that twerking started in Africa. Mating rituals, things of that nature, tying of the hip, stop me when I go wrong. All of these things get put out as if that's who we are. And it's a very limited, very narrow-minded, very sore and very disingenuous snapshot of who we are, because we get put into killers, baby mamas, this and that and the other. And then when you look at how the media is weaponized, right? They'll take people throughout the diaspora and then put them on platforms and then bring them here. I'll give you an example. There's a show on CBS called Bob Hart's Abishola. And she said things that were much more incendiary than what Frank said. You know, oh, what is it? Gangbangers and baby mamas?
Crazy.
No. that energy is designed to keep us a certain way. And then when you talk about how the entertainment is weaponized, because that's the message, that's our largest export. It always has been. Our talent and our ability to entertain, but not capitalize on said entertainment. You can't point to one major Black-owned record company. You can't point to one major Black-owned media outlet. You can't point to one major media or technological distribution center that is controlled, owned, and managed by foundational Black Americans. And so
He is absolutely correct. You know, you got to think about it. The most entertaining of Americans are Black Americans. Okay, let me be very clear here. Or the most monetizable are Black Americans by far in so many areas, in so many regions. And it's actually pretty interesting to see that, like he said, you can't point these things out. I can't think of a single record label or major industry outlet that is run and owned by Black people. Now, mind you, you could argue that, well, that's because Black Americans won't do it. No, it's because most of the time there's not that access to do so. You got to remember something, okay? Historically speaking, when it came to money, specifically when it came to wealth, Black people were barred from it. That's why things like owning homes, things like bank accounts, and so forth were often very, very limited to Black people, because the moment you build wealth, the moment you can actually build influence in a way that's very different than somebody else using you to build influence.
the message of foundational Black Americans that gets out is not our message, and I completely reject that. If that's what you think the culture is, I am here to tell you that ain't my culture. It ain't never been my culture. It ain't been the culture of most of my brethren. Do we have some knuckleheads? Absolutely. Of course we do. But do we also have things like COINTELPRO we've still had to overcome? Do we have things like the 94 Biden-Clinton crime bill that we've had to overcome? And throughout history, I have yet to see anybody from any of those 54 countries come back for their brothers that they say that they love so much. I don't remember the warships coming to get us. I don't. But what I do see is, oh, well, we're really good at educating. We take the opportunities and we're able to, go and take these American opportunities that you guys squander.
He just said a whole lot of things that, I don't know, to this moment, I'm still processing. Because it's very interesting, like he said, that you didn't see those who were taken, have people from that country, specifically Africa, come to try to retrieve us. They never did. They never did. Is it because maybe some of us were sold? That's possible. Is it because maybe, they didn't care? That's also possible. There's a lot in that process to say, you can blame Black Americans for not being able to accomplish some of the things that Africans think we should, but you also didn't live through those circumstances and never cared during those circumstances.
Yeah, because you get an immigrant experience. You do not get the foundational Black American experience. You get the same immigrant talk that the Russians get, and the Russians got a lot of nerve because if it wasn't for Alexander Pushkin, they'd still be speaking French. Alexander Pushkin created the Russian language. He was a Black man. So when you talk about where we are and where we've been, you also have to talk about the mind screw, out of respect for your channel, that we have been put under. So no, we don't have an official language because we weren't allowed to have one, but still, if you look at AAVE, it's everywhere. And when it comes out of our mouth, it goes from the hood to the boardrooms to a billboard on Broadway or in Times Square. So we have culture, we have influence, and no, I'm not just talking about taking what's the word I'm looking for? Weeds and turning them into collard greens, or taking innards and turning them into chitterlings. I'm talking about the fact that we have persevered and we are the most copied individuals on the planet. So much so, if I'm wrong, please explain Akon to me. Please explain Burna Boy to me. They all do a variation of who we are. And I'm not just talking about music. I'm talking about the walk. I'm talking about the talk. I'm talking about the hairstyles. I'm talking about the innovation. Everything we do. We took a construction worker's boot and made it the hottest item for the past 40 years.
Somebody please, in the comment section, argue this point. Black Americans are the most copied in the world, for sure. We are some of the most influential in the world, for sure, by a large margin. And like he said, you see it in people like Akon. You see it all around South Korea. You see it everywhere. He said AAVE, African American Vernacular, is often used everywhere. I wish Dave would just outright say, this is what culture is, as he just explained, so that we can hear Frank's response. Because this is very true. This is what culture is. This is what culture does. You are influenced by culture you're around, correct? And culture, right? Cultural things can influence you. Things like anime influence the black culture because it's introduced to the black culture from a different, what? Culture.
Because everybody finds a way to profit off of what we create and then demonize us for creating it and then label us criminals, uneducated, unwilling. We don't care, but they don't talk about all the systemic things that have been set up and profited by people who want to keep us in a certain box. That doesn't mean we can't escape that box, but to act like we were not put under duress for what we had to put together as a culture when everybody else got to inherit it. And that includes Haitians, Jamaicans, everybody else got to be left alone so that they could develop. We didn't have that. And to this day, I have yet to meet one African, one Jamaican, one Caribbean, one black person anywhere who comes into this country and has automatically ingrained in them before they start going, my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing, that they're afraid when the red and blue lights come on behind them when they're pulled over. And I get it, and I'm the son, brother, and nephew of cops. That's why I say, yes, we have a culture, but of course we don't have a language. But let's not be disingenuous and act like it doesn't matter, because it does. Because as foundational Black American goes, so goes everybody else in society.
So Frank, let me ask you a question. If slavery erased our Black Americans' culture, what do you call what we built after slavery? What do you call that?
Well, you have to give me an example of what you mean by what we build. What are you referring to?
You tied culture back to African and something that you inherit, but you said that got erased during slavery. But we built something. Clearly, Black Americans have built throughout slavery and the culture that we have currently.
What I'm asking is, give me an example so I'll be able to respond to that particular thing.
Well, like things like gospel is something that we built after slavery.
Songs and music.
The foods that we eat, that we consume.
Sure, songs and music exist in every society.
Is that not a part of culture?
No. Let me come to that. And first, let me make a little response to David's assertion that we were not allowed. African Americans were not prevented from speaking their language. Mm-hmm. When the ship arrived, it was one from this tribe, that tribe, that tribe, that tribe. So automatically you can speak to each other. And when you don't speak your language for a while, like I've been outside Africa now going 40 years. If I meet any of my uncles and I start to try to speak my language, I'm interfered by English constantly, and I can't finish it. I can't make a coherent sentence in my own language, because at school, you could not use that language because we are now a bucket of different languages. The same thing happened here. You were brought as a shipload of different languages. That is why Creole and Patois were created.
Americans would say that they took English and made their own language as well.
And what is that?
I mean, it's a broken version of English, but it's still something that we could speak to that's specifically to us.
What language is that?
I mean, it's English.
He's talking about Ebonics.
Well, that is talking about AAVE,
Ebonics.
African American Vernacular English. The same way, for example,
I think I've heard, yes, when I came to this country in 1994, I had a debate on my campus about Ebonics.
See, I have to interject here. He's being very specific in his way of using language, right? So he compares language like Creole and says, well, it's not useful and it's not a part of a culture, so it doesn't create a culture. Which, how do you come to that conclusion with the meaning of culture? Something was created from a mixture of other things in order to what? Communicate. So you can't say that. So then to also say, well, what kind of language does African American speak? Because if I'm going to use this thought process, then if Creole doesn't count as part of his culture, then anything Black Americans say in AAVE, African American Vernacular English, also doesn't count. Therefore, you don't have a culture. So I understand he's being very consistent in his idea of culture, but he's basing it on language. Let's be honest here. Language does not base culture. Language can explain culture. Language can come up with ways to maybe exaggerate or emphasize parts of culture, but language is not culture.
Nah,
Same thing.
yeah, and somebody corrected me. I think it was my professor said, no, if you say Ebonics, there is no one collective Ebonics.
Correct.
You have to go into pockets. If the person is from the north, the south, the central, they created their own style around it. So I understand that part. That didn't even qualify as a subculture. So let me give you, Jamaicans don't have a culture. When you say the country Jamaica, no, that is not identifiable as a culture.
How can you sit here and say that Jamaica doesn't have its own culture? How? But then again, it goes back to what he was saying, that he bases it on a certain type of language or a specific acknowledgeable language. But Jamaica absolutely has a culture. Just like any other place that you go to has a specific type of culture. Things that they consider ritualistic, lightly, or the common basis. I will respect that he is staying consistent. I will also say this, that I think that if he only uses his definition of culture and nobody pushes back on the fact that that isn't culture, then he's going to die on this hill and it's not going to be going anywhere, to be honest with you.
But the Rastafarians have a culture. Now, let me explain what I mean by worldview. The Rastafarians' worldview is that men were put on earth to take care of nature. Okay? That wealth, you have to create more than consume. So they live a frugal life. So politically, they are pacifists. They will never go to war. Socially, they are communal and what we call Epicurean. They believe getting high, eat some food, and have deep conversation is what life is about. And then religiously, they are Rastafarians. Hippies are the Western version of a Rastafarians. They also had a worldview, and that dictated their relationship with wealth. The hippies believe that humans were put on earth to create and consume, and that living in community and being frugal as to wearing the most inexpensive clothing and using things together is what life is all about. So it guided how you see them dress, where they shop from, why they marry, on and on and on. That's what I mean by any society, if you want to understand them, it's the worldview. The Jews believe that they were put on earth as God's chosen people. That through them, that is a worldview. Now, any child told that, forget hurting one of them. Because they are driven by that. That is why they insist on having a community wherever they are. The Chinese, the white community. Do Africans that come from the continent have a community? We don't. Why? Because we don't have a culture. If we had, it would drive us to have a community.
It's very interesting to continue to see this doubling down on the worldview, that everything encompassed in worldview is just culture. So, he referenced the Jews believing that they are God's people designed to, affect the earth. My question would be in this aspect, in this moment, I would stop and say, okay, so if you have a group of people who they only have their lived experience, and their lived experience before they were born that has been passed down as a systemic idea that they are less than other people, with the inability to actually find a type of wealth that they can actually explore the world, when they don't have a great world view, why would you consider that not having culture because they have a terrible worldview, or they don't have a worldview at all? It's hard to have a worldview if you haven't experienced the world. The majority, I would bank on this. I don't have statistics, but I'd bank on this. The majority of African Americans have not explored outside of the country. I'm pretty sure that would be pretty accurate. And if I'm wrong, let me know down in the comment section below. But you can't have a solid worldview without experiencing the world, right? To some degree, right? If it not just be media, you can't really say, well, my worldview of Russia is this, when the only thing I know of is maybe examples of Putin, right? That's not a good world view if you haven't experienced the world.
In the 50 states of the United States of America, African Americans don't have a community, they have neighborhoods. Now, people who got angry with me didn't even ask me, what does culture do anyway? What is it that I say you didn't have, that it makes you what? Nobody asked that question. What is that thing you're trying to hold on called culture, by the way? What is it?
You care to elaborate on that then? Now?
Now I'm asking. Once upon a time, John Lennon sang a song. Imagine we don't have religion. Imagine a world without religion, without heaven and hell. He believed in what? The brotherhood of mankind. Sure. So imagine the people without a culture. Maybe they are striving to a brotherhood of mankind. So you take words out of context and then you crucify a man.
Right.
Not knowing that I am a victim of a cultureless country.
You know, that's sometimes the risk.
I think we get angry too quickly. We're too sensitive. I was giving a talk, live talk the other day, and a gentleman, not the way David is behaving, he wrote the book and he said, my brother Frank, he doesn't know what this means to me. He called me on the phone and spoke with me. And we became friends, like on the phone. And I said, I gotta go. Even if it's 3 hours drive, if I have to fly, I'm going to see this gentleman. Because more than this conversation, there is someone here who really is a thinker. But we got to begin to tame down and accept criticism, because that is the only way societies were built in this world. In my live talk, I told this gentleman when he wouldn't get off my case, and I said, let me tell you something. You don't hate the white man. You don't even fear them. Because if black people hate and fear the white man the way they hate and fear each other, you would all have left this country at the end of slavery.
Left this country and go where?
Go where?
Yeah.
Where did the Jews go to?
Whoa, this took a left turn that I was not expecting. This man says, well, you're supposed, so if you hated the white man as much as you would have got up and left to go back to where? Like, he just asked, where would we go back to? Which is such a weird transition to go into, of hating the white man and leaving the country. Let me ask you something. It goes back to, I think that he doesn't recognize or is refusing to acknowledge the effects that black people had to go through. Do you think that even right now in 2025, the majority of black Americans can get up and move anywhere? And anywhere that they know, even, let alone somewhere they don't know. Do you think that that's possible? Do you think that it was like, oh, you know what? You know, we really are tired of being lynched. We really are tired of going through all these experiences, and you know, we're just gonna leave, guys. Like, I don't want to pick any cotton anymore. I don't want to do this. We're just gonna leave. We'll go back to our country, which, I mean, I guess it had been hundreds of years at this point, so it's not even our country anymore, and we had the free reign to do so. That makes no sense, and this is why I don't think he either understands our history or he's being disingenuous.
You know how many lands in Africa was offered to African Americans through the Black Star Line project? It was funded by a British through Marcus Garvey and Kwame Nkrumah, the Black Star Line. Did you go? No. How did you get the Amerigo Liberia culture moved back? 3,400 people only agreed to go to Liberia. What do you mean where to? Plenty of land everywhere. Where did you come back from? How about the Caribbean?
See, that in and of itself.
But I'm not saying it.
No.
I said,
Hold on, Frank.
I'm not
Let me get the day
No,
real quick. Yeah.
No. See, the thing of it is, and you gotta understand, right? Like, my favorite verse in the Bible is Proverbs 4:7. It says, "In all thy getting, get an understanding." You gotta understand Frank's perspective. In his mind, it's like, well, shoot, why didn't you go? To me, that's no different than when Kanye sat in front of Harvey Levin and the light skinned boy, never call his name, and said, you know, well, shoot, for 400 years. That's slavery. It sounds like a choice. Like, no, it's not just that, right? It's bigger than that, because what no one talks about is the psyop that was done to us from 1619 through 1865, and then after 1865 all the way through, right? So if you have been told over and over and over and over and over again that you're less than, that you ain't nothing, that you don't even get the right to call yourself a name, there are certain things that get lost in translation because he does not carry that particular experience. He's got his own experiences, and one of the things that I love, and I encourage absolutely everybody to go to this man's YouTube channel, because when he talks about black on black crime, he does not start and stop the conversation at foundational black Americans. He talks about what's happening in Nigeria. He talks about what's happening in Liberia. He talks about what's happening in Ghana. And that is something that's happened throughout the diaspora. And the one thing we all have in common is that we were colonized and psyoped, but none more brutally than us. So if you think, for example, there have been writings from Frederick Douglass, there were writings from Harriet Tubman, there have been plenty of people who have talked about how many people did not want to leave the plantation because it was all they knew, and they were scared, almost to a point where they had Stockholm syndrome. The idea of going back to a place they'd never been or had any historical reference to because it had been beaten, threatened, hung, stabbed, lynched out of them. Yeah. No, I ain't going back there. Why would I? Now, me personally,
This was such a good point and such a good indicator of understanding, because it's not just a matter of, well, just go back, because that involves a thought process that goes, I am familiar with somewhere. You can't go back to somewhere that you don't either remember or have never been to, correct? But not only that, like you said, there's a Stockholm syndrome. We have been taught for hundreds of years that we weren't people. We were taught that we are just to be used and abused. We were hung, and all these different aspects that make us believe some of the things that we had believed. And so you can't go back to somewhere that you never knew, somewhere that you have no idea of. And to be honest with you, all of your historical memories that could have been passed down have been erased. You have a new name, you have a new context of life. There's no going back. This is one of those hard things, and there's so much more. I really could do a part 2, and if you guys want to do a part 2 of this, let me know. I'll probably stop here because this has been a long video already. We should hop into more of this. I think this conversation needs to be had. Shout out to the Daily Wrap-Up crew. Shout out to Dave Anderson, and shout out to Frank Zanu. Guys, go check out their channel, go check out their stuff, and I'll see y'all on the next one.